Hello everyone. Right in. I've got a doc missing. There's the chat. Hello chat. You disappeared on me. I don't know why you did. You disappeared on me. So hello everyone. Welcome to what the Type 83 won't be. Okay. What the Type 83 won't be. That's a bit of an angle. Oh well. So I thought, you know what? There's a few things I need to do. One, I need to make sure the questions are live and the bot is working. So hopefully the bot is now working and is now taking questions. Secondly, Thursday is always alive, as is Sunday, unless I'm traveling. And then it's basically a case of, am I going to be in a place with good signal? Can I work it out in advance? If so, then I will still be alive. If I'm going to be in a place where I don't know what the signal's going to be like, yes, there will be a premiere. But I like Thursdays being alive. Now, this is a topic which I expect a lot of people to come to me with preconceived notions on, mostly because there have been tribes forming on the internet. There have been tribes forming of different groups saying the Type 83 is going to be this thing or that thing. It's going to be this way, that way. Can I please start off by saying you're all wrong? Okay, we're going to go through what the Type 83 won't be. And the first thing I'm going to tell people is this. For all those seeking a purist vision of whatever their idea of what the Type 83 should be, it's going to be wrong. It's guaranteed to be wrong. Because the reality is, it don't work like that tech-wise. It don't work like that operationally-wise. It don't work like that, scenario-wise. It just doesn't work like that. Now, why am I getting into this? Why am I getting into this Type 83 debate? Because I want there to be a good debate. We don't have a chance of getting enough ships in the UK for what we need if there is not a good defence debate. And that isn't going to be helped if the debate is uninformed. A good debate has to be an informed debate. So I'm going to start off tonight. First, I'm going to give you the answer in 10 minutes. For those people who don't want to watch what will no doubt be a 2.5 hour, 3 hour video, including questions answered, there will be a 10-minute summary at the beginning. But please note, that will be the answers in 10 minutes. If you would disagree with the answer put forward in 10 minutes, might I suggest you watch further through the video for where the answer will be given in longer, because it might be that your point of view on that answer just didn't make the answering it in 10 minutes. So, with that being said, welcome. So the 10 minutes answer. Well, the 10 minutes is rather a fun one, and it's it looks like I filled this up with text, but then you realise what I filled this up with is tweets. I have filled this with tweets. I just did a quick search earlier this week on Type 83, and these are what came up. And look at them. There are so many. And these are some quite good sources, by the way. Modern Royal Navy, fairly good source, always providing interesting information. Don't agree with everything they say, but usually pretty good information. Naval News, similarly. On this day in the Royal Navy, again, pretty good explanation going up there of what the type class is and what we therefore expect the Type 83 role to fulfill. UK Defence Journal, really nice. You can also see Gabriele Moleni. He is an Italian who is worth following for British defence, because by golly does that guy know what he's talking about. And of course, Ben Abisi-Jekti, MP. He's one of several MPs who do fairly good briefing on defence and fairly well informed on it. Is he perfect? No. But And this is the point I struggle to make, but I will make it. I don't expect the defence-interested MPs to be perfect, and I'm not going to shout them down every time they make a small mistake. I'm just happy there are MPs who are interested in defence, because trust me, there weren't that many a long time ago, and there are more these days, and I will keep pushing them up and helping them grow. Okay? But here's the answer in 10 minutes. So, you will hear about a Type 83 that they will carry more and better missiles. That is probably true. That is probably going to be the case. But that means the next one, they'll be smaller and cheaper than previous ships, won't be. Because more and better missiles take up more space, require more support, and require more systems to support them. Which all means it's going to be bigger. So, when I see someone putting out a message going, the Type 26s are going to be the last billion-pound ships, all future warships are going to be tens of millions of pounds or cheaper, I am laughing my behind off, quite literally. Because you can't physically put more and better missiles than that in a smaller ship. You just can't. It's the simple law of space and time. We have not yet developed the TARDIS. Until that happens, ships aren't getting smaller if they're going to have more and better missiles and systems in them. They will be flexible, multi-purpose assets orientated towards the future air dominance system. Yes, I kid you not, the British not only have our satellite system be called Skynet for our military satellites, we have called our future air defense system FADS. And by God, has it been oriented a lot of FADS. In the last 5 years alone, I have seen it be orientated towards hypersonic missiles, towards drones, back to cruise missiles, to ballistic missiles, to hypersonic missiles, to drones. Every time there's a new, this is gonna kill everything, topic for air defense. And every time there's a new, this is the new wonder weapon, everything else is gonna be destroyed. FADS is there to this. It's going to fight it. FADS is there. So it is very faddy. It is completely and utterly very faddy. But it is also true because it's going to have to deal with all them. But seriously, this is the problem. Now, there'll be an evolution version of Type 26 class or Type 31 Inspiration class. To accommodate FADS and the anti-submarine warfare and land attack capabilities, you would be adding on roughly 60 meters to the Type 31 hull and roughly 50 meters to the Type 26 hull. That is not an insert. That is a whole new hull design. There is a reason why most of the destroyers we're looking at for next generations for most other nations are rocking in at 12 to 15,000 tons. Now, that's simply to accommodate everything they've got to accommodate, all the computers, because people forget just how many computers are on these ships. It is your average missile system is not controlled by a PC tower unit. It's controlled by a system which would not look at home in a data center. Now, with that being said, and with YouTube being its usual YouTube systems and having done some fun settings to my ads, so let's go check the monetization setting on there, because YouTube, by the way, according to YouTube, it set it automatically to a medium frequency. So if you've had a lot of ads, I do apologize. I set it to a scheduled ads in every 30 minutes frequency. So you should get 30-minute gap between your ads. Now, here is the other problem then, once we get onto this. There'll be uncrewed drones. This one comes up. And it's also the idea which puts missiles in different ships to the sensors. That's not really a sensible idea. Let me explain why. Because if you've got a lot of dumb ships carrying missiles around, and they required a censorship. What do I have to kill to knock out all your systems? The censorship. I don't have to kill other missile ships. Or even better, if the missile ships are returning home dumb to be reloaded or have to go some, I can destroy them while they're being dumb and stupid. And then you never get your rearmament, you never get your resupply. You have sensors walking around without missiles. So, this is the reality of it. They'll be uncrewed, and drones also gets into problems when you consider these are going to be assets which are going to be used for diplomacy, for presence missions. They're going to need crew on them to carry out those missions. Let me put it this way. If you mosey into port to conduct a diplomatic visit, and basically what you've got on there is a computerized system, and it goes beep beep, hello, and has a metallic hand which comes out to try and shake someone's hand, that's not the same impression as a crew serving food and having a conversation with them. I'm sorry, it just isn't, as cool as it is. Now, admittedly, eventually we might have hologram crew that we can have to carry out these roles. Who knows? That might work. But leave it out to one side. That's a long way off. And this is the trouble again with they will need to be they will operate independently globally, because the moment they're going to operate independently and globally, i.e. do the global presence mission, they can't be uncrewed drones. They can't be small ships where their weapon systems are off in other ships, because they're going to be off on their own. Because you're not going to send out on a long-range presence mission all these extra ships of it. Even if when we look at some of the proposals for the hybrid Navy, which the Royal Navy is currently working through, and I'll be getting into tonight, what we're talking about regularly are these ships working as part of task groups, as parting in bastion areas, in areas of the sea where we don't. They are not part of our out-of-area operations force, whereas the Type 83 is part of the out-of-area operations force. And then finally, they'll be the equivalent to the Trump Defiant class. They won't be that big. I wish they would be. It would be fun if they would be. But they're not going to be that big. And this is another point to make. Traditionally, what happens is the Americans take a step up in size, and everyone else steps up to slightly bigger than the previous generation of the American ships. And that's what's happened for about since the Cold War. And that's what we're sort of seeing happening now. If you look at it, if you're looking for what's slightly bigger than an Arleigh Burke, it's roughly 12 to 15,000 tons. The Americans are possibly going up to 18 to 20,000 tons. This is usually what happens, because the Americans are looking at a global expeditionary capability, and very much they're talking about securing their position as the first nation in the world. So, I think this video isn't about the Trump Defiant class, and if you guys want, I will do another video about the Trump Defiant class. Now we have more information along the road, but please put that in the comments underneath the video if you'd like me to do that. I will do an update on the Trump Defiant program and where I think it's going to go. But as said repeatedly, my suspicion is that is the US Navy's attempt to get a cruiser rebadged again. So that was roughly 10 minutes. The 10 minutes welcome to the contradiction zone. There you go. And as said, if I haven't covered the point you are worried about, well, that's probably going to be in the longer video, a longer discussion. All right, so we're going to get there. With that being said, let's get into the first one. They'll be smaller, cheaper. You know, this is something which keeps coming up. I've heard this happening for years. I keep seeing things are going to be smaller and cheaper. Believe it or not, the British have had knocking around the Black Swan sloop proposal. That's what these plans come from. Look it up. It's a very interesting program. The US Navy, seeks small, fast ships for future fleet, i.e. we need a new version of what was the LCS concept. Why is this the case? Why do people think smaller equals cheaper? So let me start off with this. There is a very big idea, small car is cheaper than big car. That makes sense. Usually buying something which has a smaller, less capable engine and has less steel net. But smaller doesn't necessarily equal cheaper with warships or including large ships, merchant ships. But smaller keeps coming up. The idea of you can have fewer crew, you can automate all the systems, you can put everything together into this smaller package. It's a lovely idea. It's something which comes up more often than we like to admit. Because it looks so darn attractive. And the argument for it is very simple. It goes, well, we need to have X number of units to cover all these spaces. And we all know in ships that's a multiple of 3. So if I need X, then I need a fleet of 3X. Right? And so, if any ship will do, the smallest that can do it is best, isn't it? And you start talking about distributed architecture, distributed warfare. We're going to move it all across these various assets, and it all sounds wonderful. It really does. And let's put it this way, if you are honestly going to deliver that, that is great. But the example I tend to give is in the 1930s, and 1920s and 1930s, the British government had a great plan. They were going to go for cut price county class cruisers, Type B cruisers, which were going to be cheaper and allow them to get more of them for the same price and tonnage allowance than their larger counterparts. And this produced HMS York and HMS Exeter, which were 90% of the price of a regular county class cruiser. Instead of getting 5 to replace 4, I think it was, or was it 4 to replace 3, they got 2. They spent years trying to work out the design. The gun turrets ended up more expensive. Everything ended up more expensive. And in the end, they got something which had 6 guns rather than 6 8-inch guns rather than the 8 8-inch guns of the other county class cruisers. Was slower, and because there wasn't enough of them produced, and because there weren't enough cruisers in the first place, ended up being used in exactly the same roles as their Type A counterparts, but they were just not quite as capable. They had very good crews, they did immortal things like the Battle of the River Plate, they did really great things in the Mediterranean and various other campaigns. They got, York got sunk in Crete, and Exeter got sunk in the Battle of Java Sea. They fought hard. But you sit there and think about them and think about their operations and go, well, if they'd been a full price county, they'd have been a lot more useful. And that's the problem. A full price county wouldn't have cost that much more. So they didn't save much money. They didn't save much tonnage. They didn't save much of anything. And they didn't deliver on what they promised. And as Matthew Giddings just put in the chat, as if they'd been bought by Greece or Argentina or Peru, they would have been wonderful ships when we talk about how great an idea they were. But they weren't. They were bought by the Royal Navy, and they were trying to do a prime role. And this is the other problem for the future Type 83. It is going to be doing a prime role. It is not a replacement for the River class OPVs, though Lord knows we should be having that discussion right now. It is not a replacement for the Bay class LSLs. Again, we should be having that discussion right now. And we are technically having a discussion, but nothing's been ordered on that. They're not a replacement for units which are low down the totem pole. They are replacements for the premier air defence asset of the United Kingdom. And please note what I'm saying there, the premier air defence asset of the United Kingdom, because we still don't have land-based air defence missiles. So whilst we have excellent fighters, and we get more of those, yeah, that's fine. We don't have enough land-based air defence missiles. In fact, we don't have barely any other than some Landscepter. The what is considered a point defence missile in terms of naval operations, but is a short-range air defence missile in terms of army operations. And that is absurd, but that also means that's a role which the Type 83 is going to have to fulfill. Not just being a task group air defense asset, not just being a self-deployable asset to go and deliver on events and presence and missions, but also it's our defense of land-based positions. Yeah. So, dear God, Barcy. Nice one. There are so many options. So many options to do, okay? Most of us were pointed out when they were buying the Aster missile system for the destroyers, why didn't we buy some batteries, even if they were fixed batteries, of the land-based equivalent missile system to go with it? That would have been sensible. We're already setting up facilities for Aster missile support in the UK. Why not have its land-based variant? It would use pretty much the same facilities. They didn't do it. They didn't do it. But this is the trouble with making it small. And here's the reality. If you want missiles, sensors, the processing, data, power, everything, all that, of this all, then you need this. And this is a variant based on... It is actually considered... it's based on the same design tree as the Type 26. Please note that. Design tree as the Type 26. But it also has something in common with, if anyone wants to go and look them up, some of the most recent Indian designs and some of the other designs working around which BAE have been involved with and advising and supporting and getting ideas from. There is a sort of generic design structure coming up of having a VLS system forward, VLS system sort of midway in the hull, hangar, flight deck aft, lots of some guns on there, and lots of space for computers and processing power, lots of resilience in terms of power generation and redundancy. All these things, that generates sort of space in terms of requirement. That generates size. It is not a small ship. And this is an early concept, an early listing of some of the realities of what are going into this design. And this is the big problem when people start going, oh, it's going to be smaller. You sit there and go, yeah, you also want to have all this stuff in there? They want to have the ability to launch and recover multiple Pacific 24 size seaboats and potentially uncrewed surface vessels and uncrewed undersea surface vessels. They want to have the highest level of Allied National Build Standards and Allied Naval Engineering Publication 77 of NATO, so the ANAP 77, which is the highest spec shipbuild code currently in NATO, and it's got to be an application of various other Lloyd's Register rules, which means it's going to have a lot of fixed steel in it. It's going to have potentially the ability to launch hypersonic missiles, though, it's been considered, multiple close-range guns. There is a debate as to what gun they're going to have on their forward system. Currently, this image has a 57mm and a 40mm up there, so it's kind of gone with the Type 31 system. But there is a very real chance and very real standard that the British are going to want a 5-inch gun again on it, which they probably will do, as what they put on the Type 26. Which has led to a discussion of will they maintain the 240mm, or will they maintain 240mm and the Type 57 and the 57mm, because there's an idea of will the 40mm go on there, some phalanxes go on there, and the 57mm. Will they maintain all these guns? This is all up for discussion. It's got to have high speed, high maneuverability, long range capacity. And this one claims it can be done on 10,000 tons, but to my mind that's unlikely, because once you start adding in everything else they want, there's going to be issues. Because this one, and I do mean this one, has merely, and I know I'm saying merely, but please bear with me, because it has merely 14 blocks of 8 VLS cells. 14 blocks of 8. Which, by my count, is only 112 missiles. I think that was going rather short. Most nations were talking about next generation destroyers. They're pushing to 144. They're pushing higher. Why? Because magazine depth matters. And even if you can do the resupply at sea, and this is what some people are banking on, that is going to take time, and you don't know what kind of attacks you're going to have coming in. There's also space for directed energy weapons, which, by the way, are going to require a lot of power. Potentially other weapon systems outside. Britain's been looking into railgun research, which the Japanese are doing, which is another reason why there's a 57mm gun up front. They're also looking at a 3-inch gun, a 3-inch railgun system as well, which the Japanese are looking at. There's got to be a flight deck with space for up to a Chinook-sized helicopter to land on. And there's also discussions, there's got to be space for it to be a Chinook-sized helicopter to be stowed in the hangar, should that be necessary. There's also looking, of course, into things like VTOL aircraft and all those systems. So, yeah, this is going to be interesting. You know, we're talking things like the Osprey. This is going to be fun. And basically it's listened as it's got to be an air and missile defense commander, not just air and missile defense platform. It's got to be the air and missile defense commander, capable of coordinating aircraft as well as ships. It's got to have a strike platform in terms of its firepower capability. It's got to be able to conduct a Commodore plus their battle staff, which is roughly 30 people. I know they've put up there on the graphic 20, but it's now including lawyers and other things. It's going to be roughly 30, and it's got to be able to conduct boarding operations, maritime security, humanitarian aid, disaster relief, non-combat evacuation, all those things. Oh, and it's got to be able to coordinate and control drones and other systems and uncrewed systems. And it's got to have torpedo defense against, you know, the various torpedo threats. This is a lot of list of stuff that's got to be included on a ship which is supposedly going to be small. This is not going to be small. Now, the discussion you can have is, why can't we make this of a multiple platforms? Why can't we make this multiple ships? And you could do in theory, but then you've got to data link all those ships together. And then if one of the ships goes wrong, you have problems. And that's the issue. You can include more redundancy in a larger hull. In this one, I could have 4 or 5 diesel plants. One of them goes down. That's fine. I've got redundancy. If I'm in a smaller craft, lots of smaller craft, they might not have that level of redundancy. And if they have one go down, that's a big problem. Because if you only got 2 diesel plants and one goes down, you're in trouble. If you've got 2 to 3 gas turbines and 5 to 6 diesel generators, you've got a lot of redundancy sitting in there. If you've got 1 gas turbine and a couple of diesel generators, your redundancy has gone really far down. And it's the same with computer systems. I don't want to just have 1 set of computers. I need to have 2 or 3. Because if one goes down, I can't afford to have another one not already running as backup, automatically mirrored to take over seamlessly. Now, here's the point, and there are already discussions going on about cruisers. Here's the dirty little secret. Most modern frigates, most modern destroyers built by most Western nations are cruisers. They're all cruisers. Frigate means ASW cruiser. Destroyer means air defense and sometimes command cruiser. They are all cruisers. They all do the cruising role in peacetime. So they all start to sound like cruisers once you go through their list. Yes, we've got rid of cruisers, but all that's really meant we've done is everything else has been upgraded to fill the cruiser role and have inevitably become cruisers. And that is the point of these ships. They are fulfilling the cruiser role. And they have to in some regards. That's what I needed for. And in this term, what we're looking at is a ship which is going to be built these things. And one of the things I would really hope is by going for an 8 symbol rather than a 4 symbol, we're actually going to build decent redundancy into the ship. This cannot be a rerun of the Type 45 saga where people penny pinched. Because as I talked about in the Type 45 video, literally, if they'd fitted a couple more of the existing power generators in the places they were supposed to fit them, we wouldn't have ever had all the issues and worries over their power problems. They wouldn't have ever come up. You'd have never heard about it because they'd been able to cover. And the ships would never have gone, oh, we have broken down. That would not have happened. If they'd literally built the Type 45s as they were supposed to be built, half the issues we're dealing with wouldn't be happening. Even now, the whole thing about inserting cam, etc. If they'd been fitted with the original allocation of, and I think it was 30, there's a dispute about how many cells they were supposed to be fitted with for the VLS, for the Mark 41 VLS. Some people say 16, some people say 32. I think it's probably 32 if they use the space where they put harpoons, etc. But we'll leave that to one side. It's at least 16 forward and maybe more because of the large size of that particular spacing. Now, if they'd had those 16 cells, they could have turned 8 over to... only 16 cells. They could have turned 8 over to quad pack cam, and they could be carrying 32 cam as their short range missiles, 48 Astra, and still have 8 left for SM3 or whatever you wanted to load it with. And that would still be carrying more missiles than they're currently loading with the way they're being fitted out with the new capability insertion upgrade package going on. So, yeah. Welcome to the reality of this stuff. If this is built as it was supposed to, it would have been really, really useful. Now, that gets us on to, it will be a variant of the Type 26 class. Now, this also is the insert, this will be a variant of the Type 31s, but this one comes out with, well, we're already building this class of ship, so let's just modify this and churn it out. And that sounds like a really good idea on paper. Okay? It's already built as a great ASW platform. Surely, that's a really great platform. It's already built to be the world's best submarine hunter. It probably is the world's best submarine hunter under construction in terms of warships. Frankly, there ain't anyone building anything that's matching in against it as an ASW platform, because everything in this design has been focused around ASW. I mean everything. The shaping of the hull, the positioning of the guns, everything has been governed by the desire to make them the premier anti-submarine warfare platform the world has seen. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying there is, but that's what they've been built around. They've got a huge computer system on them to listen to all the data they're going to get from the various sonars and other systems that are going to reporting information for under the sea. They have got their own defense missiles, they've got guns, they've got these things. They haven't got a mast designed for the whole future air dominance system way to that. They haven't been stabilized for all those things, but no, they are already built as a fairly big ship in terms of sensor. The reality is, they are a very, very good design. But there's a problem. There's a few problems. Because they are so focused around anti-submarine warfare, if you wanted to make them suitable for the air defense operation, if you wanted to make them more general purpose, you'd actually have to start taking stuff out of their hull and reshaping their hull. And this is a problem. And this is when we start to get into this discussion. And this is probably going to be a longer discussion. Because whilst the Canadians might call theirs destroyers, and to an extent they are by Canadian standards, and the Hunter class are lovely, I get told regularly, you know what, we could build them as destroyers. We just have to build them on the Hunter class platform. Look on Twitter. You will see people saying this. The Hunter class are bigger. We just have to use that platform, and then it's an air defense destroyer. The Hunter class are exactly, and Going to give you this honestly. They are exactly 1.5 meters longer. They are 1.5 meters longer. Alright? They are 0.6 meters wider. The Canadians have the same dimensions as the Australians, broadly speaking. No, Petchington, the Hunters are 1.5 meters bigger. That is not an option. Okay? To accommodate FADS, and also if you wanted to maintain some of the anti-submarine capability and other stuff they built into them, you would need to increase this hull by roughly 50 meters. And that's not pulled out of my behind. That's literally taking in the amount of command and control space you need for drone systems that's being planned for it, for the air dominance system, and the amount of computers and stuff you're going to need for that, because they want to include all sorts of data sources in that system. And you just look at those ships and go, they're already maxed out with what they've got in them. Okay? You want to add in a great land attack capability. You want the Type 83 has also got to be... I know they don't keep skipping past it in graphics like this, but there's also, as one of the parts of it, is it has got to have an ASW capability, because it's realised that we do not have enough frigates. We do not have enough ASW capability. So yes, this vessel, the future Type 83, will need a submarine ASW capability more enhanced than the current Type 45s have. You're also going to have to rebalance the hull to take the weight being so high up, because there's going to be a massive radar unit up the top. Look again at the issues the Hunter has been having. Half the issues of the cost expansion on the Hunter have been because the Australians have developed a really good radar system, but it's heavy. It's a really good radar system, but it's heavy. And you want to put it high up in a ship. And that means the ship's going... I'm like a little toddler with a giant hat on my head. I just keep wanting to fall over. And the thing is, yes, Sadhu's right. We do have all these ships, both the Type 26s, Type 45s. You can go back as far as someone's writing about the Type 42s recently, and I did check. Type 42s even had the idea in theory, under British design practice, are designed so they've been cut in the middle and having something inserted in them. But in Type 42s, it was added on in the construction phase. It's not added on afterwards. And whilst, again, you can do it, if you go look at the Type 42 Batch 3 hull shaping, and you go and look at the regular Type 42s, you'll notice that they've had to do a lot of reworking of that hull. That hull is not the same hull stretched. It has been modified. It has been changed. It has been evolved. And it has to be. And this is the reality of what we're talking about. There are a lot of things we need to include in this ship. There's a lot of things we need to work in. Now, this doesn't mean we need to go with the same, we have to start completely from scratch, because, as said back here, this comes from the design study. But it's stopping it at 10,000 tons, and frankly, I think that's a bit weak. I think you're going to be needing to look at 12 to 14, if not 15,000 tons. And so, again, though, as far as I know, in design studies of the Type 26s, there were vessels which stretched up that far. So this is the option. Instead of looking at a Type 26 as we're building, go back to the design study. Go back to the designs which were not selected. As a rule, the British government always selects the second smallest design. The Australians and Canadians seem to have gone for a slightly bigger variant of that design. But the probability is that if it's the second smallest design, there are probably designs up there And then if you start from the biggest design and work your way up, you could have something which works, and you've already done a lot of the calculations for it. And this is the point. People talk about it as if you can just take the design and swap out the insides. They can't. Yeah, it's too much architecture, too much design, too much focus. This was built, as I keep pointing out, as a premier submarine hunter. And yes, the Australians and Canadians have modified it somewhat, but not that much. The reality is, we need something bigger. And whilst computer-aided design does help and does make things somewhat easier, trust me, when you're dealing with ship design and you start doing the hydrodynamics, etc., simple scaling doesn't work out in your favor. Sadu, placement figures are goodness. Actually, Sadu, standard displacement, does it include crew? It means the ship is fully loaded up to fight without fuel, without including fuel, and without including, well, a rough average of crew, I think. But it's a fun thing to get into. And yeah, these are the figures given. This is the reality of all this. This is what this ship is about. Now, with that being said, I'm going to go to the shameless book plug and I'm going to start answering some questions, because I'm sure there are plenty coming in. So let me open up the Discord, because I have been watching the chat a bit and going, there's questions coming in, yay! And yes, it is notable that the Type 82 was about 8,000 tons. Now, we do have a joyous thing on this channel. We do have a Discord server. And that's always a useful thing to have. Because it means we have options going on. Now, I think someone's getting told off, judging if I can hear the shouting. So, let's do this. And let's do this. I know this is normally a bit where I say thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, supporting the channel, helping it grow, and all those things. But what I'm doing today instead is, well, I'm going to say that in a bit, but I'll do that after I've answered some Discord questions. Right then. So, from Timu. Why the Type 83 aren't full-blown battleships that the King needs? Because you don't need battleships. Not Britain at this point. We don't, in the nicest way, we barely have the capacity to deliver a couple of companies to the shore, let alone the kind of brigade strength formation doing an amphibious assault. Or, a divisional strength formation, which would need the kind of fire support that a battleship would bring. So it's not really necessary. So how will this ship compare to Type 82 in terms of tonnage, firepower, and technological sophistication? It should be bigger, more powerful, and a lot more advanced. But the Type 82 we are talking about was about 40-odd years ago. Maybe 50. Doing the maths in my head. Knight 681. Why on earth does the RN need an equal to Defiant class only? There is no reason to build a ship of the size of Nelson class in the 1920s. There is actually a lot of reason to build ships that big. It depends on how much faith you place in the replenishment at sea stuff on the missiles. The fact that people keep talking about it and talking about how great it is, but not actually doing it, does suggest to me there's a lot of talk going on. There's not a lot of stuff being delivered. We'll see and wait to see what the results. One of the interesting things to me was that every time they've done those tests so far, they have then looked at the missiles. They haven't tried to fire them. And they've tried to study them that way, see if there's any damage done in transit. So we'll see what happens. But realistically, you need the two options you have are build a lot more ships, build ships which are basically missile trucks, which can supply the larger ships. But as I said, that has weaknesses. That means I take out the missile truck. If they are uncrewed assets, then I take them out, spoof them, torpedo them, and anything when they're coming back and forwards. You're going to need to escort them, which means you need more crewed ships anyway. You basically would need something like a frigate to run a convoy of uncrewed missile ships, missile trucks through to your forces. Because otherwise, someone would sneak a submarine round to go and take them out. And even that, so that means you need more frigates. But the reality is that whilst that's a good idea to go down the route and think about it, but you need more ships to escort them. Realistically, the easiest option to start off with is to just have ships which have more missiles on them. And that missiles require space. Missiles don't exist for free in the thin air. They require space. Spike, sort of like here, Steve, does the idea of optionally crewed mean that the crew could act as a passage crew to and from a port, but that they have a station on territory to operate the vessel remotely, but be available to return if required? Not really. Optionally crewed usually means it can be that a crew can survive for short term on an asset, or they can conduct maintenance, but realistically it's designed to be primarily uncrewed. It's one of those things, again, once you start getting into we're going to deploy this thing globally, independently, then that becomes a problem. Optionally crewed assets make a lot of sense as the larger escorts, larger uncrewed escorts, as we start talking about this, when we're talking about them in a task force structure, where they have lots of other assets to data link with and order and coordinate with and organize, and you have crew able to get out to them. Or maybe if you're patrolling in an area where you have something like the North Atlantic Bastion, where you're going to have a lot of air bases, you can helicopter out personnel from to go fix or get aboard them if there's problems. They become problematic if you, let's say, if you were deploying one to go around the world like the OPVs do, or like sometimes our destroyers or frigates do, our carrier groups do, and wandering in the Pacific and all those things on their own, that's more problematic, because if something goes wrong, you have no one there to fix it. And you might go, well, we can build some redundancy in. You can build redundancy in, but there are still issues. And you've got all the issues of what happens if it crashes into something. Who's responsible? What happens if it gets knocked out by a wave? What happens? All of these issues, especially in terms of the size of the ship. And the larger you're building it, probably the more likely you are going to want to have a crew aboard. Lord Chandler, how much was Henderson involved in the York-class program? Not much. They're mostly before his time. He basically used them as an example of what not to do. And he used them a lot as an example of what not to do when he was working out the Crown colonies to follow on from the towns. And that's why I describe the Crown colonies as as stripped down towns for war construction. They are literally stripped down to be more rapidly built. And that's one of the things which really annoys me when you start to look at their production cycle, because they take so long because of the ports and the other issues that creates by Churchill. But we'll leave that to one side. Nice. So why couldn't the 2012 Black Swans class super idea have been used as a successor to the Batch 1 River class OPV and the retiring Castle and Island classes? It would have been sensibly too, but no, they didn't go down that route. Basically, it was decided to be too expensive and too complicated for that. And that was the trouble, ultimately, for the Black Swan. It was too expensive to build for the OPV roles, not capable enough, realistically, for the frigate or the destroyer roles. Even the Type 31, it's got more firepower than, realistically, the Black Swan sloop was going to have. Turning 3434, is it fair to say that both US and Royal Navy have somehow found a way to be half to one generation behind what has become the standard of NATO, or am I being too pessimistic? Not really. Look, one of the troubles you start to get into is when you start to look at ships, you have to be very careful with looking at them through what they need. So, for example, I did a video recently on Type 45s, and I did look at the Horizon class, etc. And when you look at them, they can look very similar. And then once you dive into them, you realise there's lots of little differences which build up to why the Royal Navy wanted a Type 45. And that's the realistic issue. It's making your ships fit your needs. And no one is building the same quantity of ships as the US Navy are building. So, in the nicest way, the US Navy's needs are very different. But also, I would say with most of Europe, they're looking at the larger ships, some of them. But they're also, at the moment, dealing with the fact that some of their ships are smaller and less capable. Europe is not a standard thing. If you're looking at some of the German Navy ship, go look through the bilge pumps video, recordings about the German Navy. When myself and Drac and Jamie Isidore from Armoured Carriers were talking about them, they've got some great designs. They then produce some absolutely weird ships, which can be very good or very bad, depending on what, I don't know, they had for breakfast that morning, I swear. Europe is not one place. It is a very, very mixed place. And sometimes people go, well, look, Italy's doing well. Italy is, but Italy also has a constant construction program going on. And the nations which are like that are South Korea to an extent, Japan, definitely, America, and China. They all have a constant build program going on. They have a constant construction program going on. And that effect is affected and visible in their design and their ships. And that's the reality. You're not sort of looking at European nations as those nations which have a constant construction program and those nations which have allowed themselves to get into a boom and bust construction program and the issues that creates. Because boom and bust is a very, very bad system to get into for ship construction. It makes things much more expensive and much more complicated. Steve. So, given the current development for the Type 83 is currently ongoing, now how far away are we from actually ordering any and will be launched by 2038 when Type 45 is expected to leave service? I doubt the Type 45 is going to leave service in 2038. I really don't think it's going to. I think we're going to see another upgrade program go for them, and they're going to have another cycle of that. Added to that, I think we will probably be lucky if they keep giving slots away on the Type 26 production line to the Norwegians, and considering that yard is the only yard we have which is technically capable of building complex ships at the moment. And I say at the moment because there's some interesting stuff going on with Camelliads and Greenock and various other things which they're working on, so you don't know that could change. It could well be later than that. However, again, I point out Camelliads, and if Camelliads get their other yard going, their one which has the far longer dry dock, etc. in it, well, then things could become very interesting very quickly. Poppy 708. How do modern ships provide cooling for their equipment spaces? Refrigerants or heat exchanger to sea? Depends on which you're talking about, which ships you're talking about. Some of them have to require refrigerant, some do heat exchanger to sea. Some of them have got some very fancy cooling systems in them to try and, have integrated cooling. But we're doing a lot to try and reduce the thermal output of ships and reduce their thermal, visibility as well. It's not just radar return, it's thermal return, which is also being worked on. And so that's having an interesting effect on designs. I think you're seeing a lot more moving to heat exchanger to sea, but even that's desired to be minimized in some regards. He might enjoy it. Thank you for the Twitch bits, Timu. Chandlord, why are those proposals to make Type 83 being capable of being a battle carrier? Please don't go there. That's based on the old BAE proposals where they did actually have ideas for something which was going to carry Harriers as well as be a destroyer. It was a really interesting idea, and I'm really glad they dropped it. Interesting in, oh good lord, please no. John Lee, we're not even halfway through yet. There's more coming. 96831. Well, we are halfway through, but literally there's more coming. 96831. If guided missile destroying guided missile cruisers, then what are guided missile cruisers then? Heavy cruisers. 96831. We know when we missile Type 26 line class missile frigate, which raises. Yeah. In nicest way, there are going to be lots of people that are going to suggest this stuff. There are lots of people putting forward ideas, and I can understand their logic. It's an ongoing production line. There are some things that can be made sensible for it. But as said, I would prefer to go back to the actual design studies and work from there, rather than going for this is the one we're building of this class. Who knows? So far we've been exporting everything else, so I don't see why we wouldn't export these. Timmy, should the UK cooperate with European partners to get it to be free for new US systems and be more domestically produced? Not necessarily European partners, but they are working towards it. The reason I say not necessarily European partners is because there are issues within the Europe itself, and this is one of the things you're having to deal with, is that a lot of countries are pushing for their own. They're looking at their own independence and capability in these things, and some partners are more problematic than others. Jesus, the lag? There's a lag going on, Dark Souls? 96831. How likely will the Type 83 destroyers be affected by the drive to reduce reliance on America, given the likelihood of damage to current government? Look, by the time these ships are actually being ordered and built, there's a likely space of at least another 12 years, so that could be a whole 3 presidencies away. Goodness knows how many UK prime ministers away. So this is the point of getting all worried about these things right now. You can do it, but it's going to change. Who knows what it's going to be like in 2 years, in 4 years, in 6 years. You know, at a certain point, you just have to go, right then, let's roll with it. What do we presume? And, yeah. Yeah, Jonathan Moon, yes, there are, and Kate Jameson is the best source on them. So, unrelated to, so feel free to skip, are there any gun range accuracy tables for the HSL guns? Yes, there are, Jonathan Moon. Kate Jameson is the best source on them. Tweet at her and ask her very nicely. She is the gunneryist funnery specialist. Paul Emmas, do Naval designers work continuously on designs and modifications on existing ships, or do they also work on potential future requirements? They work on both, but the trouble is that they get listened to. Nice to go, everyone. Yes, isn't the USN working on a replacement with the C4VLS? They are. Lots of people are. But they're still working on it. This was something which was dropped for the best part of 40 years. It was being worked on prior to the end of the Cold War, then it got dropped, and now it's being worked on again. It's not going to be solved overnight, and it's not going to be solved in a way. It's probably going to be solved in a theoretical way overnight, but in a reliable way, which we're actually going to carry on with. That's going to be more interesting. And it gets more difficult once you start dealing with different levels in terms of VLS. Ramal, do you think nowadays the air defense capability of the ship is absolute necessity over ASW or anti-surface warfare or land attack capabilities? I think you need to have both, because why do you have the ship there in the first place? Just having a ship there, which is its air defense capabilities are great. It can't attack other ships and can't attack submarines or land targets. So all it can do is defend itself. That's not really a useful warship, is it? And so the reality is it needs to be able to do both. Timu, should the Royal Navy have aviation destroyers cruisers like Japan has? I think potentially this class is going to be walking in that direction. As said. And the last question before I move on back onto the discussion. Taking more questions, I'll deal with them at the end. What do you think about the F-127 frigate? It is a German frigate. It's a ongoing development program of roughly 12,000 tons, and it's an air defense frigate. It'll be interesting to see what it produces. I do worry if it's got enough VLS cells. It's only taking 96 at the moment. And I don't think that's going to be enough. But there again, it's an air defense frigate, not an air defense destroyer. But that's still twice the air defense missiles that the current Type 45 design had at its baseline. So I can't be too rude about it, can I? And I wouldn't want to be. But I'd also say that the F-127 has a problem in it straddling an era where the Germans really weren't caring much about the fence to an era where they are caring more about the fence. And I worry how much of the conceptual design fits with the new focus of their design and structuring. With that being said, thank you for watching the video. If you like the video, please do share and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. And thank you for everyone's support, okay? This is... I really enjoy doing these YouTube stuff and talking about people, and I really enjoy the stuff I've got coming up this year. But it's nice that I've passed 20,000 subscribers, and I really don't know what much to do. But I will say again, if you do want an update on the Trump Defiant program and all those class pro and those sort of things, please put it in the video. Put it below, and I'll get into it. So I picked this one because it's my favorite one. It's the Kraken. I was at a presentation the other day, and when I say I was at the presentation, I was there virtually. I managed to get out of having to be there in person, which was probably good for the people involved, because the level of sarcasm would have been great. Because I saw this come from the screen, right? Oh, good, they're going to talk about the Kraken. It's a really cool, really cool asset, and it's something which you can use on ships to provide defense, especially if you're going through places like the Straits of Hormuz, etc., these places, and you want to deal with the threat of drones and these things. You can put on some decent guns, machine guns, small missiles on it, sort of mark missile systems. You can do all that, and you get a really cool unit for wandering around and giving you a bit of an outer layer of defense. Basically, it's the torpedo boat destroyer for drones. Okay? So it's a similar point of, how do we deal with small, fast attack craft in the 1890s? Well, we built our slightly larger small, fast attack craft, which could engage them, and equipped our ships with rapid-firing guns to suppress and destroy them. And it worked rather well. Well, here's the idea which comes out, and someone actually put this up on the screen using the Kraken as an example. The future of warships would be this. And the future of all warships will be this. That's me going, it's good, you are the other side of a camera. You are the other side of the camera, you are safe. Because we're going, so what we're going to, all future ships are going to be, instead of us having big warships, they're all going to be these masses of small boats, small craft, which are going to swarm across the seas. And they're going to have the missiles to defend themselves against aircraft. They're going to have lasers. They're going to have all the sensors they need. The question was going through my head is how they're going to power this. Where are you going to fit this? The radar system on a Type 45 weighs more than this blooming drone you've got up as an example. This thing will be sunk. The weight of the systems you talk about putting on this thing, it's going to be annihilated. And then they go, what we're going to have to do to make this work is we're going to have to scale this vessel up by 25 times. At which point I was in there going, you must be kidding me. Do you have anything about hull forms? Have you actually bothered to talk to the people who are actually building this thing? Anyone actually done any background research, any study into the Kraken at all? The really helpful thing was I could get really loud on them because I was muted. So it's a good job I was not in the room. It's so good. I didn't send footage through to my good colleague Naval because I was worried his blood pressure might explode. He has enough stress in his life. But I did chat around it with some of the other Shipshape colleagues afterwards, and they were all agreed it was a very good thing for everyone I wasn't in the room at the time. Because the thing is, that's all a nice idea, but you start off, they go, the first question is, where are you going to command and control this from? And their point was, well, you could have a command centre in a bunker back in the UK. So you're going to need satellite bandwidth to command and control it. And let's just think about how big that bunker's going to be having to be to coordinate swarms going on around the world. And then let's just remember, that bunker system, with its satellite communications, all these things, if you take that out, you would then annihilate British conventional power at sea. But don't worry, they had another suggestion. And this was an absolute piece de resistance. The other option was to convert submarines. Now, their idea was to take old, retired ballistic missile submarines and convert them into mobile command posts. And I was sitting there going, is this going to be below or above water? They said, no, they did say, confirm, before I could say anything, they would be commanding them from below water. Now, no. The amount let's put it this way. The options that come up, we start going through, okay, sheer amount of data. You want to run that kind of data, you're talking about taking over the Starlink system. Or if you're trying to use low Earth orbit satellites. And that sort of system, that sort of kind of constellation. And again, Starlink is a great system as long as it's still working. But if I wanted to take out Starlink, all I would do is, and before anyone starts saying this is me giving information away, everyone's worked this one out. Because the way the Starlink constellation works, you only have to take out one or two missiles and to take one or two satellites out, and then the shrapnel cloud they will create will take out the rest for you. You get a nice, pretty ring of shrapnel going around the Earth. That's the reality in a serious conflict with Starlink. So this is why we start talking about communication satellites, which are slightly higher up. Now, the submarines, they were going to apparently pierce the water with a laser-based communication system which can maintain its data completely through water and air with no diffraction, no trouble. That is yet to be developed. So I stopped listening at that point. I just stopped. There was just no point. In the nicest way, at that point, they're off in cloud cuckoo foo-foo land. I will point out this particular conference was an academic conference on the future of things, but I was worried because the ones in the room who were being the sensible ones were not the engineers. I liked them though, but they were not the engineers. Now the thing is, I love all these ideas. They're lovely. It's lovely to think it through and think about it. But the reality is, drones, uncrewed assets, they have a place. But the reality is probably not this. The reality is something like this. You'll see Type 26 and a drone, probably one of the Type 92s, operating alongside it. And I have kept talking to you about hybrid navies. This is something I've been very consistent on this channel, whereby the cruisers, which are the modern frigates and destroyers, basically fill the cruiser role, are escorted by the uncrewed sloops, frigates, destroyer escorts, what those vessels used to be. And when we start looking at the speech which the first Sea Lord made recently, that is really one of the advantages. You know, when we start building up these assets, we could build these things into it. So you can start going around. So I do have my frigate there as a crewed asset, and it has direct data links with these 4 or 5 different units wandering around it. And suddenly you do have an out-of-area system. They become the loyal kayaks, the loyal wingmen of the Navy. And they work really well as that. So you go, right, and what's really best to coordinate this is to have 2 or 3 towed array sonars. Well, that's great. I've got the cruiser ship, and I've got 2 of the drones out with their towed arrays. Woohoo! All that data coming in. I've got all the computer systems on here. I've got all the information, communications going on. All the data's programming in. Okay, we spotted you. You want the helicopter out hunting with multiple UAVs to back it up, to provide extra assets, using dipping sonar, dropping in sonar buoys, making sure they keep track of things. And also, that is, again, really useful. Those UAVs do not have to go far to get reloaded. They go back to the frigate. They get reloaded. They come back. This all works far more sensibly than just going, bye-bye, fair drone, off them to the sea you go, may you fight a war merrily on your own. It really works a lot better this way. It's a more sensible system. And that's a good thing. This is the reality they keep looking to replace these assets, and they don't seem to realize the frigates and destroyers have gone up. Because it's basically they've been fulfilling the cruiser role. And now we're looking at filling in the role of the smaller ships. If you look at most navies and most nations, there is a massive break between patrol ships and their lowest level warships. Because of what they expect them to do. That break would be filled by the uncrewed assets. They would be the task group ships. They would be the flotilla ships. They would be the force ships which would come in to support things. Which is why General Jenkins' speech is worthwhile, thinking about some bits of this. And, once you start looking at what it's talking about, my aim is to have the first of our uncrewed escort ships sailing alongside our Royal Navy warships within the next 2 years, and to launch the first jet-powered drone from the carrier next year. And again, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about a hybrid fleet, but realistically, what they're talking about is, well, you know what? The crewed ships are still going to need to be crewed, but those ships which we've kind of priced out of existence because we can't build a survivable enough asset to have a human crew aboard it and to be able to do the jobs we want to do in this tonnage. And so we've really thinned out our escort numbers. Those are what the drones are going to come to replace. As I keep pointing out, drones are probably going to end up operating up to about the 1,000, possibly even the 2,000 to 3,000 ton mark. And it's going to depend. There's probably going to be ones which are smaller and ones which are bigger, depending on what you want them to do. If you want them to cruise around alongside your frigates, they're going to have to carry a lot of fuel, unless you can refuel them at sea. And that's an interesting scenario, refueling them at sea. But we'll get into all this as we go on. Now, the thing is, this actually starts to have an impact on the Type 83 design. Because once you start to consider these things, well, think about it from an air defense perspective. What happens if you have your small drones running around with Sea Scepter on them? So your future air dominance system, these ships have extra close-in weapon systems, or 57mm guns, or 40mm guns on them, and they have Sea Scepter. And there is extra assets which go around. Now, there is always the case come up of going nuclear powered for everything. And whilst that is lovely, that is also a problem. Because, as I've said before, that reduces the number of ports you can go into. That reduces a lot of diplomacy you can conduct. Realistically, if the British were going to produce nuclear-powered escorts, they'd have to have a nuclear-powered carrier they'd be supporting. If they don't have a nuclear-powered carrier, the unlikelihood of Britain having nuclear-powered escorts is very, very low. Now, there are lots of other options. One of the things that these vessels could provide is they could go forward and they could also provide extra decoys. Your uncrewed surface asset could go forward and be, okay, right then, hypersonics are at this range. I'm going to bloom myself so I look like I'm a massive ship. Even more than a regular decoy system. These things will go massive. They'll look like carriers. They'll be returning every radar signal for 1,000 miles. They'll look so big, they'll look like the Death Star on your radar returns. They will attract everything. That's useful. And again, you can do the same with thermal blooming. They can make themselves look hotter than anything. And yes, they're going to be expensive. But would you rather lose one of them or your task group? So this is where these ships start to come in and these ships start to be useful. They're going to be built into this factor. And that then brings us to that. Because that then brings us into the side. Now, please note, I have got another slide at the end here. So this is, I have factored in the timing. I'm not running too fast. So, Trump-class Defiance, they're going to be like this. My betting is currently against this, and it's strongly on this one, because these are planned to be too big for what Britain needs. Honestly, they are. Now, there is a scenario where America orders vessels these size, China builds vessels these size, the French then build some vessels these size, and then the British then build some sort of the size because they can't afford they don't want the French to have anything bigger than them. And believe it or not, just look at all the newspaper articles recently about how well the French Navy was doing compared to the Royal Navy, and that's your proof. That's who Britain benchmarks herself against still, so yes, that is what will come up. It is the French Navy. Now, this is an interesting scenario which could possibly happen. But the general idea comes to be that the Americans are building something so massive, so Britain should build something so massive. And the problem for us, and for Britain with this scenario, is that we are building stuff which is plenty big. And we do probably need to build bigger than we are even thinking about right now. But building something that big is kind of beyond our ability to currently sustain and supply it. And I hate that I'm saying this. But for Britain to sustain and supply something that big, that would take more capacity than we currently have to support the entirety of the Royal Navy. And whilst I would love to wave a magic wand and build the necessary infrastructure and investment, we might manage slow growth and investment over the next 30 years. We won't manage that much growth. We have to be realistic. And I did watch a video recently where someone said, basically, oh, the NATO powers are going to have to pick between socialized healthcare and defending themselves. I don't think it's that bad. For starters, I think there is a lot of room to grow in terms of efficiency when it comes to healthcare. Having myself dealt with some of the joys of, in the UK, NHS admin, and compared that to my experience with Swedish facilities and Dutch facilities and even French facilities, and gone, surprisingly efficient. I would say the UK system, though, is still pretty darn good, because, frankly, they do take care of everyone and they do work it out. It's just they have a lot of admin going on because it's a centralized system. However, saying that, there is also, a lot of people forget that with defense spending, that the money tends to stay in the economy and help grow the economy. It provides it provides monies which are invested into research and development, which provide jobs which are quite high-paying jobs in research and development and science, which tends to have offshoots which are not just military purpose and naval purpose. So The reality is, defense investment, especially naval defense investment, can be incredibly fruitful for a national economy. And again, a point I will make, and I have made this in a few other times, but I'll make this again, is that we talk about the closure of the mines, we talk about the closure of other industrial things in the UK, we forget the closing down of all the infrastructure to support the Navy. And how many layers upon layers that had over the country. How many development cycles, how many different logistics trains and manufacturing trains there were across the country that supported the Navy. And that had a huge impact on the economy. Getting back to this, if the whole economy system was set up and was building towards these things, everything was working on, and it worked. It helped grow the economy. It helped have offshoots everywhere else, which was growing things, which was useful, which was sensible. The reality is, this is Project 18, by the way. You might notice that tomorrow is going to be a video about the Indian Navy. It's been scheduled for the modern Indian Navy. That's what, I'm doing that to try and introduce you to their growth and their destroyer force. Their future Project 18 is 144 VLS cells, 14,000 tons, and a class of 10 to 12. And that makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. It really does. It's building a ship which is going to be a general purpose, useful asset. And in many ways, this is the sensible route. This is what a lot of nations are sort of looking at. Roughly this size. Roughly 144 VLS cells. Roughly, 14,000 tons. Roughly all these things. Now, again, I would say the Indians are also producing a huge amount of indigenization with this. They are really trying to stretch and build themselves in domestically. They have got up to nearly 75% on the last class. The Vashka Rumtas. I might just mispronounce that. I'm sorry. That produce a lot that are very capable assets. They are very, very capable assets. But the thing is, they're building this because they're actually expecting conflict. And that's the other thing I like about the Indian Navy. They are expecting conflict. They are expecting to have to fight something. And so they're looking at us and going, well, yes, we're probably going to be fighting in the ocean where we can probably pop home to be resupplied quite quickly and quite easily. We can do that. We're not really looking at a massive expeditionary capability. But will we have the option to? Will we be under such air attack? And if we have to pop home, what's going to be covering the task forces? So we want to delay that as long as possible. Now, when you start looking at the radar systems and everything they're putting in, are they necessarily the best systems? Are they necessarily the best weapon systems? They're growing. They are growing. They're growing in capability, and I like that. But they're looking a lot at their own needs. And it's the same when we start looking at the Italian Navy and their future destroyer programs. We start looking at other nations' future destroyer programs. Even the Japanese, they're currently building 2 large ships. I wouldn't be surprised if they end up with a couple more after that on larger size, because they like the larger ships. They like the amount of depth it gives them in terms of their arsenal. They like the strength it gives them. All these things, that's great. But they don't, they're not looking for infinite systems. And this is the point. You can build yourself with the flexibility and capability. You can't build everything into that. But what you do build is useful. What you do build matters in terms of capability you build. So you have to think about that. Sorry, I'm getting slightly distracted by the dog barking as well behind me. I'm not sure what's going on. I do apologise. They really shouldn't do this. Yeah. So, with all that being said, India's managing to build an capability. And they're managing to project on this. Why? They've had a constant production program going on. They haven't always had a good production program going on. Keep trying to indigenize things has made it very expensive. And has introduced delays. But there again, that's another example here of indigenization. You know, we've got Europe talking about this now in terms of NATO, in terms of their defense procurement. Okay, we've got to be more and more self-sufficient. Well, there you go. There's an example sitting across the world, in the Indian Ocean, of example of a nation which is trying to build itself up again and trying to organize itself. This is what happens. They have done it. But has it been costly? Yes. Have they had to import some technologies from Israel? Have they had to work with some other nations? Yes, they have. But they've also had to grow their own sector, and that's always a tough time. But they now have got there. They're now growing capabilities that are really useful. Yeah, dogs are dogs. They are. But I think they're upset because of what's going on. But I'll leave that to one side. Now, that being said, I'm just going to go close the door because she left the doors open. I'll be back in a second. Really, will be back in a second. Right. Anyway, back. Apologies for that, everyone. Apologies. So, with this being said, we now get into this discussion. What my bet is for the class. And realistically, there are two options. And it does depend to an extent on what kind of hybrid navy you go for. Because if you go for the hybrid navy, which I think the British will end up going for, honestly, there was an idea a few years ago to turn a San Antonio class into a ballistic missile defense ship. And that was not a bad idea. I remember looking at it and thinking, if it's got a dock at a bit that can rearm drone ships when they're going in and out, so it could be the center of a flotilla. It's already got command facilities built into it, lots of space for command and control. You've got lots of space in the hull which can be converted for computers and for missiles. You've got a huge amount of missile space, huge amount of flight deck space that you can put in a hangar. Or you've got power generation up the wazoo. Yeah, it's not particularly fast, but surely you could modernize that and upgrade that, and you could actually make it something sensible. Now, this is a scenario which you have to consider, because if we're going back to the hybrid navy idea of having drones as this kind of capability, you need a space which those drones, especially larger ones, can go into and can be rearmed, can be modified, can be repaired. And that's the point. If you have a docking facility that they can float in and float out of, that's the easiest scenario for it. But again, it means to be a docking facility which they don't have to slow down to use. So this is not going to be an easy work, because most of the docking facilities work by docking down. You're going to need a facility which you can make wet very quickly, have them float in, float off without actually dropping speed. You're going to have to probably be able to maintain your cruising speed of 18 knots while doing it. So that is not going to be an easy option. Okay? That is not an easy scenario. Other people come to the idea of, well, it can't be just crane them on and crane them off, and you can do that, but every time you crane a vessel in and out of water, you have a lot of risk. You have a lot of chance of damaging it. You want to have something that you can do which minimizes that risk and also maximizes the size of the asset you can utilize. Because again, if you want to have a drone vessel which can take CAM missiles, which can take a 57mm gun, which can take decent sensors, etc., for its size, We're talking something which is going to be about the size and probably probably slightly larger displacement than a modern landing craft utility. Now, this is an option, and this would also be a vessel which, let's be honest, considering its size, is going to have a lot of space for VLS. So it's going to carry a lot of VLS systems. But it's not going to be a traditional destroyer in any stretch of the imagination. It's going to be, okay, we have moved to a future air dominant system. We have moved to something which we're calling a destroyer because it's an escort which is destroyer based. But it is also a vessel which is a mothership for drones. And is shamelessly a mothership for drones and built around that concept. The other option, the other scenario, is building something which is a more conventional destroyer scenario. And, okay, in terms of gun, that's going to be interesting. Because, again, lots of the designs have come out here from this 83 concept from the British Aerospace, etc., and MOD, where they put where they basically put in the Type 31 fit of 40mm and 57mm. And lasers. Okay, that's a starting point, but I don't think that's going to work, as said. I think you're going to need something which has got at least a 5-inch gun. Which, if it is a destroyer in its case, it is going to need more than 128 VLS cells. It's going to have to be closer to the 144, if not more, mark of the Indian Navy. And that becomes an issue. Because if you do have 2 or 3 silos across, let me explain that. Because, you see, in the 4-bit, it's probably going to be 2 sets of silos across, so it's going to be 8 and 8. And, again, this might affect if you have hypersonic systems as well. If you have an 8 and 8 across, and you have 16, so it's 8 across, and then you want to have 4, well, 4 of those sets of 8 on each side, that's 8 times 8, that is 64 VLS cells. That's lovely. But probably you want more than that. Probably you're going to need more than that. And this is the thing, is you might include CAM as a separate VLS system, the Common Air Modular Air System, CSEPTA as a separate VLS system. You might not. You might want to make it quad-packed into for something like a Mark 41 VLS, or some side, or the latest variant of Silver souped up, if we go that route. In which case, you're probably going to want more forward. So my scenario, I would say you need at least 12, looking at 12 forward, which is 96 cells. And then aft, well, you might want 96 again, but you might make them 3 across rather than 2 across, because if you've got enough beam going back, you could make it wider. And you could make it 3 by 4 and have another 12. And then if you're going to go, well, then I have 24 blocks of VLS cells. Yes, you do. How many VLS cells does that give you? Anyone want to guess? Well, let me tell you. It gives you 192. 192 VLS cells. Why am I saying such a high number? Oh, well, it starts to become easy once you start thinking about it. If there's a future air dominant system, I do not see it being much of a system if it doesn't have an anti-ballistic missile capability and anti-hypersonics, which are going to be larger missiles you do not want to use when defending against things like aircraft. So you want to have those missiles off. You're going to want to have a decent number of those missiles, at least probably about 24, because you're going to want to fire 2 per target, so that's 12 gone. 12 targets, 24 missiles. Possibly you want to have 32, but there we go for it. You also want to have land attack. Well, that's going to be what? Another 48 missiles? To give yourself the range of options? So 48 kind of Tomahawk missiles. That's 72 VLS cells used already. Then you've got CAM as a system. Well, that could be another 24 VLS cells, which even if it's quad packed, which would be sensible, that gives you 96 CAM missiles for your close-in air defense, and then that leaves just 96 other cells for your regular air defense missiles. It's amazing. When I say the figure 192, that sounds so many. But working through like that, 192 VLS cells doesn't sound a lot, does it? It narrows down so quickly once you start really thinking things through. And none of those, we're not talking, there are no anti-ship missiles including that, other than land attack missiles. Maybe they have a dual purpose. In which case, you definitely need that many. We're talking, and none of those missiles listed are anti-submarine ones. And that's one of the reasons why I keep talking about the 5-inch gun, because the 5-inch gun has the great capability of a range of shells, including a anti-submarine system, an ASW system, which basically drops into the water as almost a depth charge at range, which if you've got a load of little drones coming at you underwater, and you just pepper that water with those shells, you could blow them all to smithereens. At range. Alternatively, any that survive then get to come into your anti-torpedo system, which could, if it's based on the Israeli system, would have an active anti-torpedo torpedo in it. Yes, the Israelis have a functioning anti-torpedo torpedo. It works in everything. So, this is what we're talking about. You want to have endurance, you want to have replenishment, you want to have all these things. You are talking something which is going to be a lot bigger than 10,000 tons. And has got to be a lot more viable than 10,000 tons. Can get you. Especially if you want to have enough VLS. What I'm looking at with the current concepts coming in is almost as if they're building something which is actually a large destroyer for the period we've just been in. Not a large destroyer for the next period. It's a large destroyer for the 1990s, not a large destroyer for the 2030s. It's 40 years out of date. And that's a scary thing to have. But honestly, that's where our discussion is, because people are looking at it going, but if it's got 128 cells, or if it's got 96 cells, that's double what the Type 45s had, so that must be great. No, the Type 45s were on their arm for that period. Type 45s should have had 96 cells. The Type 45s should have had 96 VLS cells. Same as an Arleigh Burke. And when I start talking about 192 cells, I'm not talking about a large number. Again, go through that number again. 24 for hypersonic and satellite interception. 24 for CAM. 48 for land attack. 96 for surface to air. That is not a lot. Thank you for new follows to the channel, by the way. There's been a few that have been picked up this evening. Thank you. And again, that sounds such a big ship, but it's not. This is the trouble. For some reason in the European theatre of discussion, we have got completely out of touch with the real size of ships. And this is a problem. Because if you want to secure building a warship which can go anywhere in the world and be useful is a very good metric for building a ship which is going to be really useful for securing the bastions. If a ship can go further, a ship can fight longer, can support itself for longer, it is going to be even more useful. Now, I do love there are already people in the chat going, well, what about if if they are CAM missiles? They won't be CAM. And they won't be Asta. And I use CAM as an example of the short-range missile because, in the nicest way, again, we're talking probably 2040s before these come into service, so they'll be whatever those systems are at that point, which are probably going to be an evolution. There's already work going on Asta, on Aquila, and then there's going to be the next generation of missile beyond that, which the British and the Italians and the French will probably end up working on together again. And maybe the Dutch and the Japanese will work in with that. Who knows? There's also MBDA are pretty much pushing ahead. There's also the future of CAM, and CAM is not going to stay around forever. Again, there's going to be a new missile expected to come on behind that. So what we're talking about in terms of existing missile systems, they may not be the choice in 2 decades' time. There may be a fusing of the CAM and the Asta line. There might be. There's already been discussions about it, of whether or not you could take the similar ideas and could put them into a larger, more powerful missile. There is certainly a good answer for it. It could allow you to develop a air-to-air missile and a surface-to-air missile, both land and sea-based, which builds off the commonality of CAM to build something that's equivalent to Asta in terms of its period. But that's something which we will have to approach with and have to think about. Now, questions. And there are some coming in. And the questions are open. The bot is working. For those who do not know about the bot, there you go. That should be popping up in both chats explaining about the bot. And I will pin both. He says, I'll pin both. So that people can find it. And then I will open up, once again, the questions. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Jay Arlington. It's the second time you've ever raided me, and it's very nice of you to raid me. Hello, everyone. I am just reached the taking questions portion of the discussion, and thank you for all the raiders turning up. There are pinned messages at the top which have how to ask questions, and the questions are sent by the bot system called Powder Monkey to Discord, and I'm working through questions at the sort of discussion. Ramol, do you think the current US regime is rushing the FFGX program before the 2020 election? No, I don't think that. I think they are rushing it, but not because of Congress killing it. They're rushing it because they've got to have something. And basically, holes in the water are better than nothing. But as said, the LCS has been bad enough. The constellations were overspec'd. I think in some regards, the FFGX program is setting a new baseline, so now it has to just be better than them, than it has to be better than LCS, and so that they can pushing everything down again. But I do wonder if they're going a bit too far. All right. It's one of those things of, Yeah, I can see the reasoning behind it. There is a logical reason for going down the route. They're not articulating it, but there is a logical reason for doing that, in that you've got reached the level of, we're just building better and better and better, and we need to build something which is cheap, cheerful, and we can build in numbers. And they can only do that if they actually reset the numbers. And they've gone to the what is the most bare bones option available. Sudo, if it's a dedicated electronic warfare frigate, a good idea to say support vessel type 83? Nope. You need electronic warfare built into. This is the other thing I didn't really get into in discussion, but these ships all these crewed ships are massive electronic warfare assets. They have a huge spectrum of listening systems. And one of the reasons why, especially Britain, but other nations do like to have warships, even OPVs, wandering through places, is because they're picking up all the data signals going on. People think about satellites going overhead picking up data, but trust me, no. The warship wandering through the Straits of the Singapore Straits going, hello, is picking up a huge amount of data. And even if it can't analyze it, it can store it and take it back later or send it home. Warships are huge data traps. They're massive data centers and huge data traps, basically, these days. Paul Amos, with the new designs, would the Royal Navy be better to go for Stanflex over VLS or have a combination of two? It depends on what happens with Stanflex. The Danish are currently doing some interesting discussions about it, and there is the problem that they always went into Stanflex with the idea that other nations would follow them into it. And then they did really bad job of selling it. This is why they're doing the video about what happens if Britain got involved in Stanflex after the Falklands War. Was an interesting idea to start off with, as it basically starts a thing of others getting involved, and then when you've got enough people involved, it reaches critical mass and a lot more get involved. The thing is, not enough people got involved in Stanflex. They looked at Stanflex, thought it was a great idea. The Americans tried to mimic Stanflex with the modules for the LCS and all these things. But the reality is, they haven't managed to get there. They haven't got it all. And so it's going to depend on what happens with Stanflex, honestly. Ramal, opinions on the AUKUS program. Do you think the US is holding... No. Honestly, the US is good at building ships. There is this idea. The US is good at building ships. The trouble is it's getting all the ducks in a row of all the political system to pay for it and sort it all out. With the US, there is the design side and there is the jumping through the hoops side. And the jumping through the hoops side causes a lot of issues. And that's the reality of what you're dealing with. It's a lot of jumping through hoops. It's a lot of layers of politics and a lot of pork barreling going on. So you need to always think about that. And even Britain, at the moment, in a nice way, we've got the defence investment plan. Anything that's being levelled at the Americans could be levelled at the Brits for holding things up at the moment. And the Australians have their own issues. So everyone's facing fun. Okay. So, counterface, what do the numbers stand for in Type 83 and 45 and so on? Well, that's quite a fun thing, but, to answer that one, it's pretty darn easy. It's one of the reasons I put it at the beginning. So, if you are in terms of 11 to 30, so if they're types 11 to 30, roughly, they're usually called anti-submarine frigates. That's what their focus is. If it's types 31 to 40, were allocated to general purpose frigates. Type 41s to 50 were allocated to anti-aircraft frigates and destroyers. Type 61 to 80 were allocated to aircraft direction frigates, which has sort of ceased to exist. So I wouldn't be surprised if those numbers get repurposed soon, because the frigates are already starting to get up there. So I wouldn't be surprised if ASW frigates either have to start again, and we have a new Type 12, or they're going to jump into 62, 63. And then we have 81 to 99, types 81 to 99, are general purpose frigates, destroyers, sloops, which are capable of doing air defense, land attack, and anti-submarine warfare. The general purpose frigates of the 3140 are basically sloops. They're general purpose escorts. 81 to 99 are considered general purpose warships. And the idea is an escort is part of a task force asset, but doesn't do independent operations. A warship can do independent operations, can be a task force picket. So hopefully that explains that. Tuning 3434. How fully stacked are European shipyard slots actually at the moment? Artillery intel guy with a subpar variant of normal channel content. I'm not sure what. Proposed the US could be making EU slots. There is a theory about this, and there is the practical. In practical terms, European yards theoretically have a lot more slots available than they actually do. For them to actually get the full slots available, they'd have to go to a double shift system, and they would have to probably start actually opening up some of the space which is theoretically available but isn't necessarily available. There is a lot of space which has been earmarked as, this is our space to be able to be used, and we've been paid money to keep the space available if in case of it, we need to do a mass building program. But realistically, it hasn't been well maintained. So that needs a lot of investment and a lot of work to actually get that to work. But it is there. It is there. It's like when I talk about the British and their submarine capacity. Theoretically, we have the capacity to build 6 to 8 submarines at the same time. We usually only build 3 to 4 at the same time. Why do we have such a large capacity versus around? It's when you consider all the different spaces they've got for storing sections of the hull and how we build our submarines in a modular format. Once you go through it all, there is a lot of space there. But it isn't most efficiently used. Why not? Because we actually do pay for there to be space. We don't necessarily pay to utilize that space. Governments have often liked the idea of being able to say, we've got this space if we need it. Not actually checking, because if they checked and they found out that it wasn't actually space there, then they'd have to do something about it. So, Ramol, why did the Australians buy the Virginia class? I said about it. Because, frankly, again, it's the British production, but also the Virginia is an active production line, whereas the Astute is a ending production line, with the British focusing on the ballistic missile submarines of the dreadnoughts. Troll Fredericks, with almost every major navy nowadays expanding their VLS capacity, do you think building a frigate with only 16 VLS in 2026 is the equivalent of building a pre-dreadnought in 1912? Look. People will go, it can be quad-packed with CAM and all the Alpha, or CAM or Sea Sparrow, and it can be, and that will give you 64 missiles. But why the frigate are you limiting yourself so much? And in nicest way, you're already talking about something which is usually a few thousand tons. It doesn't really hurt to stick at least 32 VLS cells on it. And then if you quad-pack it, well, it's got 128. And that's a lot more defensive coverage. But also, you can put other systems in those 16 slots. You can put other missiles in. So you can give yourself a lot more capability. So, yeah, I would personally not be doing it. I do know nations are doing it because they believe they're saving money. But again, if you're paying for all the computers and the systems to support 16 cells and to support those missiles, realistically, adding on another 16 cells is not going to add on a lot of cost. You're literally just paying for the VLS modules at that point. Because pretty much, the difference is not that great. Bob's Modelling Mayhem, 8632. For someone who's not well versed on modern ships, how do you tell the difference between frigates, destroyers, and cruisers? Okay, so as a rule, frigates are ASW orientated, so you'll see their primary weapon system, they're primarily talking about in terms of their ASW, they usually carry a massive sonar and towed array sonar system. They will usually have their computer systems orientated around that. They'll also usually have all their systems rafted and shielded to make them as quiet as possible. And usually they have a slightly thicker beam versus their length than destroyers because they're orientated more around maneuverability than cruising speed, but that has become less and less a factor. That has become less and less the case. Okay? So, yeah, that's usually frigates. Destroyers, usually orientated around, they will carry more VLS cells. They will usually carry more they'll be air defense orientated. They'll have a far larger radar unit, usually a larger mast to support the radar unit, and will be balanced around stability. Will have their hull balanced around stability because that's what they need to focus on. Because stability is their criteria to maintain their radar having as good of. Because if the ship is moving like this the whole time, that affects the imagery of the radar. So it needs to try and keep as stable as possible. And cruisers, Well, no one's really building many cruisers at this point. They're usually building large destroyers. And that's the reality. Most cruisers these days are pretty much large destroyers. And most of these ships these days are pretty much doing the cruising role in peacetime of the President's mission, of going around doing naval diplomacy, of being the sole ship turning up to be the naval presence. So most of the normal ships actually fulfill the cruiser designation as well in peacetime. So this is why I say frigates are ASW cruisers and destroyers are air defense cruisers. Ramol 3866. Which number of VLS cells are the most effective for AW capability? Most modern frigates of Europe have at least 16 cells of Aster missiles. Could US frigates have less cells? I wouldn't want to have less cells, and I wouldn't say 16 are actually the good ones. If you look at that, they are usually the older designs which are having that. If they are building them still at this current level, that's not enough. Apologies. Blender Bob. Have you talked about the Legend class frigates? Does it make sense in the sense that the Constellation class can't do its job without becoming a destroyer? To an extent, the Constellation class became a small destroyer because they're constantly judged compared to the Arleigh Burkes. And this is a topic of a video I've got coming up. I've got a video coming up called The Burke Supremacy, which is entirely about why the Burkes have come to dominate US naval shipbuilding. So much so that it's made it very difficult to build a frigate, very difficult to build anything else. And that's the joy of it. The Burkes are so good, they are such a 75% solution to so many problems, everything is automatically compared to them, and that means that everything either gets turned into them or gets turned into, that you're trying to go to extremes to justify them. Joe Fredericks, do you think the reason why the People's Liberation Army Navy is less focused on at-sea replenishment of VLS is because their home ports are closer than the USN? No, they're focused on it. They're looking at it as well. Okay? The PLAN is looking at it as they're growing their expeditionary capability, but the thing is they haven't yet got the global expeditionary capability. They're growing it, they're developing to it, they haven't yet got there. So they're doing a lot of theoretical work, but they're not really pushing it as much. They are pushing it for some of the South China Sea operations, but again, they've got a lot of ports and facilities they can rearm in that area. Calvin Gasberg. Do you see more widespread NATO use of 2 or more size of VLS, like the Type 45, armed with CAM, Shroom Farm, Silver launchers, or just a different length Mark 41? I would prefer them to just all have... Well, honestly, I would prefer it if all the VLS cells were the same. If you went for strike-length CLS cells for all your, let's say, 192 cells, then you have a large range of capabilities of where you put stuff and how you orientate your ship out. And you can split it so you don't have all your VLS of one system concentrated in one area. I like the idea of spreading it out because... What can I say? I'm one of those people who worries about damage control and likes the idea of survivability. And let's say you could have a shock to your electrical system, which could throw out the electrics on the back of the ship for some reason, which could affect your aft VLS cells. If all your CAM missiles and all your, let's say, all your CAM and all your standard attack, your SM-free anti-ballistic missiles and anti-satellite systems were all in the back, then suddenly you can't use those systems, and that's a problem. I believe in spreading my stuff around. Power supplies and weapons. I believe in them being spread around and you having capability everywhere, just in case. And I know some will tell me, but that's a very remote chance of that happening. And I agree it's a very remote chance. But then, I remind you that we're designing a warship, which is designed to go into somewhere where other humans are actively trying to damage it. And, even more for fun, it is operating at sea, and the sea is always actively trying to damage it. And saltwater, which is also always actively trying to damage it on a different level. So with all these things as factors, I like redundancy. Sue me, but I like it. Ramol, do you think the UK would have Type 83 and those while the US still... There is actually a scenario where I do see the Type 83s coming to service while the USN are still building Burke Flight 5 or something. But again, that's a video. That's a more of a discussion for the Burke supremacy. Demo, did you tell this to your late dad? My dad agreed with me. My dad, the naval architect, agreed with me on this one. There again, he was the guy who, what was it? He used to keep a toolkit in the house, a toolkit in the garage, and a toolkit in the car, just in case one got mislaid and he couldn't find it. And also, and occasionally there's a missile load exploding during load and launch. Yeah, or they can have other fun stuff. Blenderbot, would you cancel change a Constellation class frigate even if it wasn't having cost explosion? Does it probably need BMD? Honestly, I'd have been tempted to still build about a dozen of them and just keep building them, build a dozen of them and just leave that, and to cover me until I got something else coming in. Give me time. Rather than rushing into the little FFG frigate they're going for, build a dozen of the Constellation class and just keep working, because at least they'll cover the LCSs and a few others. Foxhound 421A. Do you think the Spear Brimstone is a missed opportunity right now? Oh, it would be very useful. But also, so would 76mm. So would all sorts of things which have been missed opportunities. There is a reason why the navies which are less worried about drones are those ones which have fitted large amounts of guns to their ships. And I'm just going, yeah. Well, the navies which haven't are frantically researching things like, we're going to make a laser system and we're going to pay for it. Why? Because that's better than admitting we need a small gun. Rapid firing large numbers of them. This way, it's a high-tech solution to the problem. You could just put a gun up there, a remote-controlled weapon system. Yeah. But the laser's cooler, right? Stu, I wonder how long before we get drones which are the same size as torpedo boat destroyers. Not that long away. A few hundred tons, about 300-400 tons is coming quite soon. There's a two-part question. Can we say these lines of dialogue from Stingray episode Deep Heat aired in February 1965 seem disturbingly similar to the attitude of people in regards to the age of the UUV and USV? But the Stingray version rather I didn't get the second part of your question, Knight, so I'm just going to do this and hope the second part of your question comes in. Alright, Ramol, do you think the UK is the first and most effective? No. I do think we're being forced down the hybrid route faster than we necessarily want to go, but we're going down that route quickly because of the economics of the situation we're dealing with. Foxhound, was the 8-inch gun Hawkins refit practical, and how useful? Not really practical, no. And how useful would it have been? It would have been great, but frankly it wasn't really practical because they were designed around 7.5-inch single mounts, and the 8-inch guns we had were all the mounts available were twins, so they couldn't really deal with that. Teamy, should one of these ships lead the NATO Baltic fleet out of Visby, supported with Luleå class Swedish and Hans class ships? We'll see. There are some interesting discussions to be looked at with the Finns and the Swedes at the moment. Interesting discussions. Paul Westbrook, do you see drone ships as a way of providing escorts for the Royal Fleet Auxiliary? Yes. Potentially they will do. But again, I see the drones fulfilling in the role of what used to be done by sloops and frigates and escort destroyers in World War II. They're providing that level of escort. So basically, you're going with that, okay, crude ships are warships, crude ships are RFA, crude ships are capital ships. Escorts are uncrewed assets. That makes sense. Some bright guy could get the idea that all undersea vessels should be packed with unmanned instruments. Atlanta, then you'd be out of your job. Yeah, that's pretty much what they think of. This is what... Look, the idea is very simple. It's the same as getting rid of drivers on trains, but you ever notice, whenever I talk about driverless trains, I usually talk about things like the underground, which are systems where you could quite easily close them off from, or limit down outside interference to the fact that they could therefore work within their scenarios. I prefer not to talk, I don't talk about turning trains which travel above ground, where there are lots of things like cars and planes and other accidents which can get involved, and various forms of weather patterns to make them uncrewed. Because again, the human gives you the ability to react to the unexpected situation immediately. They don't, a logarithm-based system, even an AI-based system, is going to need a lot of computing power to support it, and that's one of the fun things I do find. And people go, well, no, you can train your logarithm on this system, and then you can load it and run it on a Raspberry Pi. And I go, you can, but not necessarily at the speed you need it to be run, or the capabilities and sustainability you need it to be run for these kinds of chips. And also, that means it stopped learning. And then if this stuff changes, you've got to retrain it all again and send out new ones and fit new ones, and that's going to be a problem. Or are you going to do a data download? Well, that opens up a system of... So we can now overwrite this computer system's entire process by satellite communications. Doesn't that sound like something which someone would want to hack? I mean, that sounds like a problem to me. So this is what we're dealing with. Uncrewed systems look like a way to save money. They're also a way of increasing risk in other ways. Tuning 3433. Sal has been highlighting that gas turbine Aliberks running all over the world at maximum RPM are a real logistic hog. Are Type 45s better in general, or mostly Queen Elizabeth Clarke 2 cruise speed optimized? Yeah, they're mostly cruise. They're about the same. Honestly, it's about the same. It's one of the reasons why I keep talking about potentially combined nuclear and gas power system. Integrated electrical propulsion based on a CONAG system, where you have the nuclear provide the base power, the hotel power, the standard operating power of the ship, and the gas for when we need to churn up a lot more power and quickly. Those are options, but again, that introduces nuclear into the system, which causes issues when we start talking about ports and things you can visit. Lions, what would a Type 83 look like if it was based on a Queen Elizabeth class hull, modified and maybe shortened? It would look fat. Paul Bestwick, on the economy and capability, the closing down establishments were a huge mistake. They were, but again, if you don't have the Navy to justify them, you can't do that. But they, I worked out the do you agree was coming on that one. Joe Fredericks, do you think in the future the Pakistan Navy will operate exclusively partner with China, or will they do a mix of the European, US, and Chinese systems as they currently do? Probably the mix to maintain their independence and also to maintain their interoperability. You have to remember, the Pakistanis do a lot of work to maintain interoperability with the Saudis. And that's important to them, being able to work with the Saudis. The Saudis provide a lot of foreign currency to the Pakistani government and the Pakistani armed forces to basically hire, I think it's about a couple of divisions, plus some air power, plus occasionally naval power, as extra for their own defences. Tuning 3434, what kind of deployment lengths are you thinking of for the Type 83? Probably about the same time as we're talking about now with the Type 45s, 6 to 9 months. Rumsim, how likely is Aegis for the Type 83? Unlikely, because the British will probably build their own system again. The British already work on their own ASA radars and are quite happily working away on the next generation. Samson radar is a pretty darn good system. There are talks about it being a fixed panel array system, and discussions of it being a triple-sided array or a quadruple-sided array. And there's also discussions of it being a sextuple-sided array, apparently, I've heard, in some discussions. So we'll see what comes out of it. Paul, do you think that an even bigger vessel with even more missile capacity would be a better option to allow for redundancy, given that they wouldn't be ready for at least 15 years from now without major investment? That is not currently available in the next 5 years, at least. I'd love it to be bigger, but I think 192 is about where I can aim for and campaign for and hopefully get to it, too. Calvin Gasberg, how viable to place a VLS farm near the hangar so the forklift? Not very hard, not very, because the nicest way, as you can see from this picture, you aren't getting a forklift truck up there. Now, if you're talking about... There's no chance. You don't really have forklifts as well on small ships. So enough, when I was in Malta last year, okay, I saw a lot of Chinese tankers, presumably carrying oil, waiting for some time before docking. Was it because if they're not delivering oil bought and paid for using futures contracts? Yes and no, but also there's the fact that if they've shifted suddenly, and you have to remember there were various issues going on in the world at that time, if you've shifted suddenly, you need to get your paperwork in order, and sometimes you're waiting for the paperwork to get in order. There are lots of reasons why ships could end up waiting and hanging around if they're merchant ships before they dock. The other thing is the limited docking space. If they are having to hang around Malta, that would suggest they are having issues. Now, sometimes these issues are problematic, sometimes these are useful issues, but, you know, it suggests to me that they are having issues. Sorry, just checking the YouTube because I got a funny signal from Restream. It's always fun when Restream sends you a funny signal and you're going, why have you suddenly gone that? Why are you doing that to me? That's not nice. Okay. Okay. It is working for me. Some people are saying they've got the Circle of Doom, but it's working all for my systems, as far as I see, on YouTube, as well as Twitch. Twitch is, as always, seems to be working fine and just happily popping along. Okay. So, there are options for going on. Sadaf, if someone pretends to have been in the Royal Navy, what questions can you ask to identify their imposter? Usually get them to talk about curry night and scran. Because usually the stuff that people will research things like ships, etc., they won't research the food. Joel Fredericks, seeing how the Russian Navy is planning to scrap the Kuznetsov and some of their battle cruisers, how the Russian Navy used up the freed up budget? Probably to support the ground war in Ukraine at the moment. Long term, who knows? But at the moment it's going to be ground war in Ukraine because that is taking everything, especially with the strikes the Ukrainians have been doing on their oil, on their oil refineries. The Ukrainians have been doing deeper and deeper strikes into Russia, you know, debilitating some of their oil supplies. Russia still has a great deal of infrastructure, so you are not really seeing as much of an impact yet as you could do. But if it carries on, then the issue could grow for them. It's one of those things of... the people who are saying Ukraine are losing the war in Ukraine are over-egging their case quite a bit, and the people who are saying they're stomping the Russians are over-egging their case quite a bit. The Ukrainians are sort of over-egging their case quite a bit as well. The truth is mucky and in the middle. Okay? Anytime, this is the first thing I always try and tell my students. If someone's telling you passionately, everything is one way, a confirmed conclusion, they are probably misreading their data, or they are lying to themselves or to you. For one reason or other. And what do I mean by this? Well, let's put it this way. If I go outside, it's raining, it's obviously wet. That is a very clear conclusion. That is a very simple piece of information. But if it's something like, okay, so we've advanced this far, we've advanced this far, we've hit this target, we've hit this target. It's not a simple case of going, well, okay, so you've both hit targets. Do they have equal value? Have what you've taken cost the Ukrainians a lot? Or has it cost the Russians a lot? Has what's been destroyed cost the Russians? One of the things about Ukraine at the moment is the Russians have done so much damage to Ukraine that there aren't as many sexy targets in Ukraine as there used to be for them to go after. So whilst there are still plenty of targets for the Ukrainians to hit in Russia, the Ukrainians, the targets which they do have left are harder to hit and are more well defended. So, yeah, it causes fun. And Morgelson, I just can't see an uncrewed ship who gets blamed when something goes wrong. Yeah, that's the reality. For once you're talking about something the size of what this duties and this vessel's going to be, that's the reality. You're not going to get the uncrewed ship. Rommel, would you call the Burkes Flight 1 and 2 as frigates? No, they're destroyers still. Again, this point goes back to the whole discussion I often have about capital ships and the capital ship spectrum in the 1900s and 1940s. There's people go, well, hang on. Of course, Hood is a fast battleship. She has the same quality armor as a battleship 2 generations earlier than her. Yeah. So what? That's 2 generations ago. The spectrum's moved. And it's the same when we start talking about, if you looked at the G3 and the M3, if they both get built, no one in their right mind would turn around and look at the G3 and go, you know what, that's a fast battleship. Because they'd be looking at the battleship of the M3 and go, that's a floating frunk of steel. Okay, how have you made a solid lump of steel float? That's the battleship. And in that context, the G3 is a battle cruiser. Because the spectrum has moved. The technology has evolved, and this means the spectrum has evolved and has moved. Because of that period, that change. And that's the reality you sometimes have to think about. It's just, these things are not fixed lines in the sand. Same when talking about destroyers and cruisers. If you're talking about ships of 10,000 tons in the 1920s, that's easy. They're a large cruiser. Today, there are frigates and destroyers which are 10,000 tons. Does it mean they're all cruisers? Well, I said earlier, they're all doing the cruising role, so they pretty much are cruisers. But they're not cruisers. We're not going to call them cruisers because they are a frigate and they are a destroyer. Bittern. There is an issue that the yarn in Wisconsin that is to build the Constellations and before the Freedom Class never has built Burkes and might not be able to. So cancelling them, yeah, they're not going to get cancelled. They're going to get something. Kazan, I mean, there were some ironclad frigates that was around 10,000 tons. Yes, there's one called HMS Warrior, which is around 10,000 tons. Joel Fredericks, with the Koreans feel maybe planning to build 4 frigates and possibly more further down the line, why would the KPN build them knowing the full well that they... Because they're building the ships for the capability of building them and because they have coast to secure. They need ships, they need presence, they need the capability. Paulus, would it be worth having the class nuclear gas turbine and the other half gas turbine diesel? Not really from a maintenance and training perspective. Probably yes or no. Do modern warships use fiber optic data spines or still cover for damage and shock reasons? Okay, the last open source paper I read basically discussed using both variants of the systems. So they had both in case of damage and resilience. I But again, that's one of the things you have with cabling. You will be putting in damage and resilience. You'll be putting in stuff which it goes, okay, so this is going to survive. This won't. And fiber optic has been developed, and there's some casing. One of the fun things is, in my house... Have I got it? Have I got my piece of Cat 7? Yes, I have. So, I use, for the data cabling in my house, Cat 7. Which is a really obscure data standard, but it's what I like. And I like it because it's all shielded. There's shielded pairs there. It makes it very, very tough. Which means if you have animals or anything in your roof, or anything gets in there and tries gnawing on the cable, they're not going to damage your data cables. It does, though, mean that you can't... It's very hard to bend round, and it comes back to its normal shape naturally. So it does have some issues with putting it in. Now, I like Cat 7, and I first learnt about Cat 7 in terms of data standards years ago when I was talking to people who were building ships. And whenever I have designed IT systems, and I've designed a few in my time, because I remember worked my way through my bachelor's and master's as an IT technician systems. I did design and help design a few systems. I always made the spine of the network Cat 7. Survivability, but also resilience and general data capacity were always good reasons for it. Okay. Slayerdef, I'm sure you get this question all the time, but is Alfred the Great's moniker of the Foul Royal Navy justified? And if so, what gaps and capabilities existed between the first English fleet that he found and the first incarnation of the modern Royal Navy, established by Henry VIII? The modern Royal Navy isn't established by Henry VIII either. It's actually later than that. Royal ships, which are not the same thing as a Royal Navy, are established by Henry VIII, realistically. Yeah, Alfred the Great is stretching it, but is definitely the first professionalised English Navy. And it can change its history, and you can trace some of the ships, especially the sink ports and various systems, in terms of maintaining a fleet back that time. And yeah. But yeah, it's stretching it a bit. Chris Hits Human 6360. With more standoff air, sea, and land, will ships have more air defense, or will there be a shift towards subs to avoid coordinated saturation type attacks while still having strikeability? They've been predicting that due to the threat of aircraft, that ships are going to move to submarines since the 1920s. The reality is you can't defend a convoy. You can't defend a carrier, you can't defend all these systems from submarines. You can't project power in terms of visibility of power from a submarine. A submarine is a great thing at sea denial, at stealthy strike, and all these things, but it's not necessarily a power projection in terms of diplomatic power projection, or in terms of presence, or in terms of combat power, in terms of defensive formations, an option. And so, yeah, you're not going to do that from submarines. You're going to still need surface ships, so we're going to keep working on them. And this is the trouble, is that people keep going, well, look at the threats. Well, then you build the ships to deal with the threats. That's the thing. It's a constant A versus B equation where both keep pulling. And the reason these ships are growing so much in size in terms of VLS capacity, etc., is to deal with those threats. Joe Fredericks, what compromises to the Rafael did the Indian Navy make for it to be capable of ski ramp operations? Not as many as you'd think, but not too bad. It wasn't too bad. Nice to everyone. Would Admiral class suit Type 83, or is it too imperialistic? I'd love it to be the Admiral class. I don't know. It could be the Duke class. It could even be the E class. There's all sorts of weird discussions going on. Serdaf, do you blame Churchill for the failed Gallipoli campaign, or is it truth a lot more complicated than that? I've done a whole video about that, and it's interesting. So basically, there's a whole video on that on this channel. So go to that one. Room Sim. Due to the French currently going for small vessels like the FDI and not showing any interest in the bigger escorts, what effect would that have on the Type 83 due to Britain still comparing to French? The FDI is not... No, the French are talking about a large escort. The FDI is their equivalent of the Type 31. The frigate, the Intervention, is their type of the equivalent to the Type 31. It's their smallest escort class. They are looking at they're also we're looking at the successor to the Frem, which is going to be another large frigate, and they're looking at the successor to the destroyers as escort for their carrier. Those are far bigger vessels. So yeah, FDI is not what the French are. The French are trying to sell everyone on it, but it's their equivalent to the Type 31. It's their light frigate. It's the frigate, the Intervention. It's their colonial police frigate and task force asset. It's a great ship, don't get me wrong, but it's not the future. It's not what the French Navy are just all going about. No matter what some of the press keeps talking about it. Mostly the press that's talking about it is not French press. It's other people projecting stuff onto the French Navy. And the French Navy looking at them quite confused and going, have you not read our plan for the future French Navy? Have you not read that we are planning these new big destroyers that we want to work on with Italy, and kind of like the Horizon class destroyers, and succeed from them and go even bigger and all these things? So yeah, that's the whole thing. The French Navy are fun. They are some of the most sarcastic people you ever get in a room when it's talking about their future Navy. And especially, they get very rude about Australians, for example, presenting on the... I can't think why, but, Joe Fredericks. With the Type 004 being supposedly 120,000 tons, yeah, maybe. How long do you think before a carrier of 150,000 tons is built in the future? If they do go back big, they're going for a very, very big vessel. And that's going to be interesting to see what its dry docking facilities and various sustainment facilities are like. But that's also a point at which even the US Navy is probably looking and going, oh, we have to match this. Currently, I would say 150,000 tons is probably unlikely in terms of carrier design, because at a certain point, what are you getting? As I've talked about before, realistically, 98 seems to be roughly your limit in aircraft capacity before you start to get into trouble. 96, 98. Anything over that, you start to have trouble with coordinating of the aircraft due to humans. We've had this fun, and we've tried these out with aircraft numbers and people going for large numbers of aircraft and operating them in terms of actually operating airframes, not just airframes you're carrying. About 96, 98 seems to be the limit. And yeah, you can fit that on roughly 100,000 tons. Which is what the Gerald R. Fords are. And also what the Chinese are looking at in terms of their aircraft capacity, because the Chinese aren't stupid. They aren't trying to reinvent the wheel. They're going to use sensible things. The Chinese have done some of the most evolutionary development of ships of any navy in the world. So, yeah, we'll see what they produce, but they're not going to go weird. Steve, with Type 83, do you think the 5 options the RM will offer? What do you think of the 5 options the RM will offer, and what would a Dr. Clarke offer them, knowing that they always pick the second smallest? My second smallest would rock in at 15,000 tons. My smallest would rock in at 12,000 tons, and then I go up in 3,000 ton increments till I had something equivalent to a Trump Defiant class. So literally would go 15,000 tons, 18,000 tons, 21,000 tons and 24,000 tons. But that's how evil I am. Well, best pick. Type 83 is Admiral class. Should include New Nelson Hood and some way levering of the old Duke of Edinburgh. Honestly, the thing is, realistically, Britain needs about 12 ships. That's the thing. The Type 45s were cut far too short, and you need about 12 of these kind of vessels. Set up. Who are some of the best espionage historical fiction writers for learning about the Royal Navy? I appreciate the Bond books because of Fleming's vision and insight into life back then. Are the Sharp novels worth reading, for instance? Sharp are pretty good. Poldark books. Richard Woodward. There's a few others like that. Douglas Riemann does some good books, so it's worthwhile looking at him. And I think Alan Evans has done a few other good ones as well. So yeah, they're usually good authors to go and have a wander around. Patrick O'Brien, as Lyons has just said. Okay. Joe Fredericks, with more demanding fleets and needs of 6th generation aircraft, do you think a 100,000-ton carrier will probably be the minimum for the plane built in the future? I don't think so. Honestly, 6th generation aircraft get a lot of a bad rap, but again, one of the advantages of a carrier versus an airbase is you can build everything in, and you can build in the power supplies and everything in from the get-go. So, and the thing is, you've got a finite amount of space to work it out. The aircraft size, this is one of the things, again, I love when people go, they're going to get smaller and cheaper. So don't look at drones and go, yes, there are some cardboard drones. There are also some multi-million-pound super drones, which are massive. The reality is going to not be so simple. It's not going to be one or the other. It's going to be both. And it's the same with 6th generation aircraft. But also, there is a point at which I think with 6th generation aircraft that you start getting some benefits in terms of the crewed aircraft from the drones, because you start going, well, do I need to send a crewed aircraft into this, or can I send its loyal wingman into this? And what am I going to do? I don't think realistically you're going to go for a lot more. The carrier could get bigger, but I think if you are pushing up further, that's an issue. Also, small issue. You can have one aircraft, 2 aircraft, or 3 aircraft. Aircraft does not get an S on its end. Aircrafts is when you're doing crafting in the air. When you're doing craft hobbies, when you're building jigsaws or those things in the air. Aircraft, like when we go talking about attack craft or these things, it's a singular and a multiple. It's kind of like sheep. You can have 1 sheep, or 2 sheep, or 3 sheep, or 4 sheep. You do not have sheeps. Don't worry about that one. It's a personal bugbear, though, because I used to teach aircraft engineers a history of engineering, and I used to always have to explain that, because the amount of them who go through UK schooling and not know that. Yes, I know it's pedantry, Steve, but the thing is, it's my personal bugbear, because I've been dealing with it for years. Okay? I'm not being rude, Joel Fredericks. I'm just helping you, trying to do that in a sort of a helpful way, because, as said, I have had students come through it for years through schooling in the UK and still get it wrong. And I sit there and go, no one teaches this. And I go, well, it doesn't matter, does it? I go, it does matter. Because they're different meanings. And also, I say this because I'm dyslexic, and I get criticized all the time for my bad spelling. So I try and stop others falling into the same traps which I fall into due to my dyslexia. Because I get fed up with being nagged about bad spelling. Even though it's honestly quite often true, because I've misspelled something. And even though it's often people being very nice about it, you still go, oh god, not again. So can we say the current plans of Type 83 of 6 to 8 is just wages more? Yes. Look, and that's the way, the Indians currently operating 13 destroyers. The Indian Navy. They are planning 10 to 12 of their next generation ships, and they're not going to replace all their classes with them. They're probably planning to grow up to 16 to 18 destroyers as their strength. If that's what the Indian Navy is aiming for, and I mean, they're not anywhere near as expeditionary or as global reaching as the British. Should the British also be possibly looking at a slightly larger number of ships? Gactor, do you think the US Navy will make a replacement for the It's going to depend on funding. It's going to depend on the politics, that one. Yes, it is children. You have a dozen children. You do not have a dozen childs. Childs is a family name. Children is the multiple of children of kids. Yeah, it is fun. Timo, I'm now worried. Have you found the Dr. Clarke's dance movie on the video on social media? It was on Instagram. It was in help of some. I was asked by some of the students, the PR people for the Justin Craig were there, and there was chocolate cake involved, and I did it. Okay. And the point is, my view was, no one else would look bad because in comparison to me, they will be dancing fine. Okay? So no, we do not. The fact that there are now 2 videos out there of me dancing on Instagram disturbs me. Sayedov, just like Magellan Strait is somewhat misnamed because Magellan didn't technically circumnavigate the globe, as he dialed whilst there at the Philippines, which was completed by his second in command. Are there any other interesting cases of sea-based geographical names that are honestly named like this? So many. So many. But, that's a video. That's a whole video. Speaking of which, Patron Olga suggestions will go live tomorrow on Saturday. If maybe tomorrow, but probably Saturday. And that's the answer to the dance questions. And with that, I'm going to go and answer the last couple of questions, and then I'm going to go and sort out the rat problem, which has probably not been sorted. And then I'll be in Discord for more chats if people want to talk about this more. So, I'm going to do this. And I'm going to do... this. The bot is closed, but I will take instead the last question because that came through just after the issues. But sorry, Knight. There we go. I actually was nice tonight. So, Joel Fredericks. Do you think the James will build an actual dedicated aircraft carrier? Will they continue with these move to destroy light carriers? Oh, I think they'll go aircraft carrier. I think they will go proper aircraft carrier, but give it time. And Slayer Darth, how do you know if the country requires a standing professional navy or not? And what workarounds can they implement if they find it's not in their best interest of such a capability? I guess they could play in a coalition, use privateers, etc. Basically, if you've got a significant amount of your trade and your security dependent upon your sea, so your economic security and your national security dependent upon sea, you need a professional navy. That's the argument, and that's the sensible thing. And nice to everyone. With getting more Type 83, how do you know we don't? How do you know we don't, that when we don't have enough people in our population, according to this, see more deaths than births going forward? Automation can only go so far. Automation can only go so far, but also there is the fact that you can automate the ships down as much as possible. You can reduce the crewing needs, but also there are options. And one of the things I think you are going to see a correction of soon is probably cost of raising kids, because there are enough governments which are now currently realizing and panicking over population that they are starting to think they need to start improving things. There is a reason things like the 2-child cap, etc., was got rid of and probably will not return. In that even the benefits cap in the UK will probably not return, because the reality is we need more people coming through. We do need these people, and we do need to. Look, I'm one of those people who actually sits at the economic system and goes, capitalism isn't bad. What the trouble is though, is that the capitalism at certain points can become cronyism, and even worse, can become, in many ways, monopolism. And I think that's the problem, is that there's not been enough true disruptors in the economic markets in the world. And especially this is the case in the UK, as in building. Building has become, house building especially, has become a very closed group. And that's the reason why house prices are quite so massive. And there is a lot of land banked by developers. And it makes sense for them from an economic perspective. Here's the thing. What's really bad in this scenario is I can understand from a business economic perspective, they are doing exactly the right thing. They are maximizing the price they are getting for what they're doing. They are maximizing their assets. But from a national perspective, it's not the right thing to be doing. Because it's causing us all sorts of other issues. Anyway, with that being said, thank you very much, everyone, for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I hope you'll be joining me on Discord later for a chat. For coming up, well, next week we have the Japanese and forging a destroyer navy in the Cold War, which is going to be a cool one. And also, what do we have coming up? What 5 topics would you disagree with most or all of other naval historians, and why? Oh, good lord, that is going to get me into trouble. That is going to get me into trouble. But it's going to be fun. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and take care. As said, see you on Discord later. I'm going to go sort out what the issues are, and take care. And hope, if there are issues with the, as said before, please do watch these videos and check if the issues turn up in terms of YouTube adding in a lot of adverts, and I'll fix them, because YouTube does seem to add a lot of adverts into my videos. I have no idea why. Thank you very much for watching, and take care.